Right now, the price of gold and silver is telling you one story, and the people with the most money on the planet are telling you the exact opposite story with their actual cash. That's not a metaphor. That's what just happened in the second quarter of this year, and almost nobody is talking about it the right way. Here's the belief everyone walks around with. Gold and silver had their moment. They peaked back in January, and now they're crashing. So the smart move is to stay away until the dust settles. Silver is down over 50% from its high. Gold's given back more than a quarter of its value. If you're scared off right now, honestly, that reaction makes sense. But here's the part that doesn't add up, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. In the same 3 months that gold posted its worst price decline in over a decade, the world's central banks didn't sell. They didn't wait on the sidelines. They bought gold at a pace that broke records. Not a little more than usual, over 6 times more than what regular investors pulled out. That is the unthinkable part. The price is falling, and the smartest, best-informed buyers on earth are backing up the truck. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly why that gap exists, what the actual Fed calendar looks like between now and September, and where every major bank on Wall Street thinks gold and silver are headed from here, with the real numbers, not the hype. Welcome back to OG Asian Guy. Quick disclaimer before we get into it. I'm not a financial advisor. This video is for education only, and nothing here is a recommendation to buy or sell anything. Always do your own research. Now let's get into it. Segment 1, the crash by the numbers. Let's ground this in the actual numbers because half the confusion around gold and silver right now comes from people quoting the wrong time frame. On a year-over-year basis, gold is still up over 20%. Silver is still up over 50%. If that's all you looked at, you'd think this was a banner year. But that number is hiding the real story because it doesn't show you what happened since January. On January 28th and 29th of this year, gold touched an all-time high just under $5,600 an ounce. Silver did something even more extreme. It hit an all-time high above $121 an ounce, a level it had never come close to in its entire trading history. Then, over the following 6 months, both metals gave a huge chunk of that back. Gold has fallen roughly 27 to 28% from that January peak. Silver has fallen more than half, over 50% from its high. So when someone tells you gold and silver are crashing, they're not wrong. And when someone tells you gold and silver are having a great year, they're also not wrong. Therefore, the real question isn't which number is correct. It's what actually caused that 6-month collapse from the January peak. Because that cause is either still active, which means more pain is coming, or it's a temporary shock, which means this is closer to a bottom than a top. That's what the rest of this video answers. Segment 2, the Warsh Fed and the bond stress. The first force behind the drop is monetary policy, and it centers on one person, Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh. Here's the context you need if you're newer to this. When the Fed raises interest rates, or even signals it might, it makes holding cash and bonds more attractive because they start paying a real return. Gold and silver pay you nothing while you hold them. No interest, no dividend. So when rates go up or are expected to go up, the metals become less appealing by comparison. When rates come down, the opposite happens. That single relationship is the engine behind most of what you're about to hear. Kevin Warsh has a reputation as one of the more hawkish voices to lead the Fed in years, meaning he leans toward fighting inflation aggressively, even at the cost of slower growth. Since he took the chair, the Fed has also moved to end the kind of detailed forward guidance is the so-called dot plot that markets use to lean on to predict future rate moves. Less guidance means more uncertainty, and markets hate uncertainty. That uncertainty alone has added volatility to gold and silver on top of the rate story itself. At its July meeting, the Fed held rates steady, but the vote wasn't clean. It passed 9-3, with 3 regional Fed presidents dissenting in favor of a hike. That's one of the more divided votes in years, and it tells you the internal debate at the Fed is genuinely unsettled. Going into that meeting, markets had priced in roughly a 2/3 chance the Fed would simply hold. But then came the release, a hold paired with hawkish language and a divided committee, and within days the market's own odds flipped. Traders began pricing in roughly a 63% chance of a hike at the September meeting instead. The market predicted one outcome, got it, and then immediately started betting on the opposite for next time. That whiplash is exactly why gold and silver haven't found a clean floor yet. Layer on top of that, the US-Iran conflict that's been running since February, which has kept oil prices elevated and added another source of inflation pressure, the kind of pressure that makes a hawkish Fed chair even less likely to blink. And here's where it gets serious for the entire financial system, not just metals. The 30-year U.S. Treasury yield recently hit its highest level in 19 years, north of 5%. When long-term borrowing costs for the U.S. government climb that high, it isn't just a gold story anymore. It's a signal that bond investors are demanding more compensation for the risk of holding U.S. debt over the long haul. That kind of stress in the bond market is one of the things that historically eventually forces central banks back toward easier policy because governments can't sustainably finance themselves at those rates forever. So to summarize this piece, A hawkish Fed chair, a divided committee, an oil shock keeping inflation sticky, and bond yields at a two-decade high. That is a real and fully explainable reason gold and silver pulled back from their January highs. But, and this is important, none of that tells you where things go from here. For that, we need to look at what the people who actually move markets with real capital have been doing. And that's where this gets genuinely strange. If you've made it this far, drop a comment and tell me. Before I even get to the next part, do you think the Fed hikes in September or holds again? I want to see your read before I show you what I found. Segment 3, the unthinkable part. Here's the number that should not make sense if the bearish story on gold were the whole picture. In the second quarter of this year, the same 3-month window when gold posted its steepest quarterly price decline in more than a decade, the World Gold Council's own data shows central banks around the world bought roughly 289 tons of gold. That's not a modest business-as-usual purchase. That's a record for the quarter. Now put that next to what was happening on the other side of the market. In that same quarter, gold ETFs, the funds that regular investors and institutions use to get exposure to gold without holding physical bars, saw about 45 tons flow out. Investors were selling. Central banks were buying more than 6 times as much gold as retail, and institutional investors were dumping. Think about what that actually means in practice. Every time an ETF sees outflows, the fund has to sell physical gold to match the redemptions, and that selling pressure pushes the price down. Every time a central bank buys, someone has to supply that physical gold, and that buying pressure pushes the price up. So you had a tug of war happening in real time, retail fear pulling the price down, central bank conviction pulling it up. And for this particular quarter, the fear won on price, even though the buying was 6 times larger in volume. That's the kind of divergence that doesn't last forever. Here's the part that matters most for you as an investor, and it's a distinction almost nobody explains clearly. Central banks are not trading gold. They are not trying to time a quarter or catch a bounce. When a central bank adds to its reserves, it's making a multi-year, sometimes multi-decade decision about how much of its national wealth it wants parked in an asset that isn't anyone else's liability. A central bank doesn't care that gold had a rough 6 months. It cares about what the next 10 years of currency stability, government debt levels, and geopolitical risk look like. And by that measure, they kept buying through the exact window when the price told everyone else to run. This is the same instinct, by the way, that's showing up in bond yields. When the most indebted governments on earth are paying the highest long-term borrowing costs in 19 years, and at the same time the institutions that manage national reserves are stockpiling gold at a record pace. Those two things are not a coincidence. They're the same signal read 2 different ways. One group is quietly hedging against currency and debt risk with their actions, while public sentiment is still reacting to a 6-month price chart. None of this means gold can't fall further in the short term. Central bank buying didn't stop gold from posting its worst quarter in over a decade. It just kept a floor under a fall that could have been much worse. But if you're trying to figure out whether the people with the best information in the world think this story is over, the honest answer is their checkbooks say no. Segment 4, silver's quiet structural story. Now let's talk about silver specifically, because silver is being pulled by a second force gold doesn't have to deal with in the same way: industrial demand. Roughly half of all silver demand every year doesn't come from investors or jewelry. It comes from factories. Solar panels, electric vehicles, semiconductors, and increasingly AI data center hardware all consume real physical silver. That's silver's superpower relative to gold. It has the second demand engine gold doesn't have. But it's also silver's vulnerability. Because when growth worries show up, like they have with a slowing US economy this year, industrial buyers get cautious, and that shows up in the price. Here's the structural fact that gets lost under the day-to-day price noise. The silver market has now run a supply deficit for 6 consecutive years, meaning the world is using more silver every year than mines are producing. Deficits like that don't resolve themselves quickly. They get absorbed by drawing down existing above-ground stockpiles, and those stockpiles don't refill overnight. There's one more number worth understanding here because it's one of the oldest tools in precious metals investing, the gold-to-silver ratio. It simply measures how many ounces of silver it takes to buy 1 ounce of gold. Right now, that ratio sits around 69 to 70. Historically, it's tended to run meaningfully lower than that over long stretches. When the ratio sits this elevated, it's telling you silver is cheap relative to gold by historical standards. And when that ratio has corrected in the past, silver has often moved faster than gold on the way back, precisely because it started from a more compressed price. So silver's setup is genuinely two-sided. Short-term, a slowing US economy and softer growth data are a real headwind for the industrial half of silver's demand. Long-term, a 6th straight year of supply deficits and a historically stretched ratio to gold are the kind of structural conditions that, historically, don't stay unresolved forever. Segment 5. The dates that decide everything. If you only remember 3 dates from this entire video, remember these because every one of them can move gold and silver by a meaningful amount in a single day. September 11th, the Consumer Price Index for August gets released. This is the last major inflation read the Fed gets before its next meeting, and it lands just 5 days before that decision. A soft number gives the doves on the committee real ammunition. A hot number hands the hawks exactly what they need. August 27th through 29th, the Jackson Hole Economic Policy Symposium in Wyoming. This is the annual gathering where central bankers from around the world speak, and historically, Fed chairs have used this stage to signal their next move before it's official. Kevin Warsh's remarks there will be read line by every trader on the planet. September 15th and 16th, the FOMC meeting itself, where the Fed makes its actual rate decision. Now, on where the big banks think gold and silver actually go, JPMorgan's research team has set a target of $6,000 an ounce for gold by the fourth quarter of this year. And their own strategists have been upfront that hitting it depends on a real risk. If the U.S. economy stays strong enough that the Fed feels comfortable holding a hiking cycle in place, that target gets a lot harder to reach. On silver, JPMorgan's research has projected an average price of $81 an ounce for the year. It's worth being honest with you here. Not every forecaster agrees. Some shorter-term technical models are considerably more cautious and see silver drifting lower before any of this plays out. That range, from the low 40s on the bearish end to well above $80 on the bullish end, tells you how genuinely unresolved this moment is. Anyone telling you they know the exact number with certainty is selling you confidence they don't actually have. Let's bring this all the way back together because there's one thread running through everything we just covered. Gold and silver fell hard from their January peaks. That part is real and it's fully explainable. A hawkish Fed chair, a divided committee, an oil shock, and bond yields at a 19-year high. That's the story the price chart tells. But underneath that price chart, the people managing national reserves bought gold at a record pace. During the exact quarter, the price fell the hardest in over a decade, buying more than 6 times what retail investors sold. That's the story the checkbooks tell. And silver is sitting on top of a 6th straight year of supply deficits and a historically stretched ratio to gold, even while short-term growth worries keep a lid on it. 3 dates are going to answer which story wins: September 11th's inflation report, the Jackson Hole Symposium at the end of August, and the September 15th and 16th Fed decision. Everything between now and then is noise around those 3 signals. I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below. After everything in this video, are you more on the side of the price chart or the side of the central banks? Tell me why, and I'll pin the best arguments from both sides. If this actually helped you understand what's really going on instead of just another gold is crashing headline, hit like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.